To do a video and show you how to use my new painter brushes that I've put up in my store recently. And there's a lot to painting in Photoshop, obviously, but what I wanted to do was just demonstrate how I use them. But if you want to learn a lot more about painting in Photoshop and learning the techniques that I use to create painterly portraits like this one. So this one here, I painted completely using my brushes, and if you zoom in, you can see the actual paint strokes and all of the details, or lack of details. So I think the thing that you have to remember about painting in Photoshop is that we don't really want to maintain the realism of the image. And I have another suggestion, which I'll go over in depth in my workshop if you're interested. And if you're interested in my workshop, it's going to be over Zoom. We're going to have at least 25 people in there. It's not going to be very expensive, but it's going to be 4 weeks of full content, okay? And typically I do it on a weekend, and I know with time zone differences, it's a struggle for people in Europe and in Australia and New Zealand, so I apologize for that, but it is what it is. So one of the things that I want to stress is here's another one that I'm working on. I'm just going to turn off my paint layers really quick and go to the basic image. So this is my basic image that I started with, and if you zoom in, you can see there's a lot of grain. And the reason for that was because I shot this at ISO 640. I was using continuous light, and these continuous lights were not Stella Pro. They were another brand, and therefore I had to bump up my ISO pretty high. So I had a whole bunch of grain. So my suggestion, so you're not combating grain in your image, if you have an image with grain, is to run it through Topaz, denoise, and then you end up with an image that is already buttery smooth and has no grain, and that way you don't have to spend ridiculous amounts of times with your brushes trying to get rid of the grain. So that's a tip. All right, so let's get into the tutorial, and I'm just going to show you briefly what I did with this image, and then we're going to move on and I'm going to demo some of the brushes, okay? And for those of you that have purchased the brushes before today's date, and we're looking at today's date of May the 16th, I am actually going to refresh your digital goods through my store because I've added a couple of additional brushes that I know you're going to want, and I'll demo them as well. So the first thing that I did was, as you can see here, I didn't like the ear showing, so I did a couple of steps and got rid of it, and it looks so much better like that. And I used a brush in my set for the hair. Now, this is something that I'll teach in my Zoom course, and there's so much you can do. Painting, honestly, I feel is so much more relaxed and easy than photo retouching, because photo retouching, you have to maintain the integrity of all the pixels and you have to make it look perfect. Whereas in painting, you're allowed a lot of sloppiness and a lot of however you want to go because it's art, right? So the next thing that I did was I switched up that bra. And that's the other thing about painting in Photoshop. If you don't like the way your wardrobe looks, if it looks wonky, if you have a bra showing, a safety pin, all you have to do is come in and you can paint it all away. And it's so gratifying, you know, to do that. So that's what I did next. I removed the bra, I removed some of the tulle down here, and yeah. So if you want to learn how I do this, like really learn, then I will place a link in the description for the Zoom course that is going to be starting in a couple of weeks, and you can join us. And then let's just move up here. So you can see that her skin is still very realistic with a lot of grain. So the next thing I did was I painted the skin. I painted the veil. You can see how the veil looked really textured. It was just tulle, but then with really beautiful brush strokes we can make it look really painterly. And this one is not finished yet, but this is what I did. If you look at that tulle, Let's just zoom in a little bit. Okay, that's all brushwork with the set that you got. And how amazing is that? Okay. And you know, I wanted to do something that wasn't AI related, because right now everything is AI related. And especially for the photographers that I know that love to compete photographically, this is something that you can actually submit. Because if you're creating wondrous pieces of art using AI elements, not necessarily the subject, because my subject's always photographic, but for some reason in competition they don't allow AI. I think that's going to change. I think they're fearful of it, to be honest with you. So we'll wait for that to change, and then we're going to go in there and rock everyone's world with our images. But until then, this is another thing that you can do. And I know that, you know, there's a lot of Corel painters out there. I personally couldn't grasp Corel Painter. I am so proficient at Photoshop that I was like, oh, I got to figure this out in Photoshop. And this is super easy. So let's get into the details. And this image was shot at my workshop last year in West Virginia. And there's no noise in this one, so we don't have to run it through denoise. But there's several issues, right? Like you can see some grain. I'm not super concerned about it. She had some relatively bad skin. Those eyelashes, not gonna lie, y'all, they're killing me. I cannot, even with those crazy volume lashes that these girls get, I feel like it takes away from them, but to each their own. Anyways, this is what we have. So what can we do for this image? So I'm just gonna duplicate my layer, and I'm gonna go to my brushes, and I'm gonna go to our brush set. So there's several brushes in here. The first one is a background blender, and let's just demo that. So the background blender, if you look up in your mixer brush settings up here, you can see that we're working with this color. We don't want to work with the colors. We want to turn that off and turn on transparent layer, because we want to only deal with the actual colors that exist within the image, and that way we'll blend them. Now our wet is 33, our load is 18. I kind of want all of these the same. So if my wet is 33, I want my load to be 33. And mix has nothing to do with it, because we are not adding new color. We are simply using the colors that exist in the image. So this next one, my flow, I'm just gonna have it at 30. It's a nice even number, doesn't really matter. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna increase the size of our brush. And remember, this is a mixer blender, which means that we want to create some mixing between all of the pixels. And all we do is little tiny circles. So one thing that you have to remember with the mixer brush when you're using the mixer brush is if you do a line, it creates a line. So you don't ever want to do a line, you want to do circles. So little circles, and every time you lift up your stylus, because you can't really do this with a mouse. I'm sorry guys, get on with it, get yourself a tablet and a stylus, because that's how you're going to be more like a true artist. If you're using a mouse, you're going to get cramping, and it's not going to be nearly as perfect as you can get with a stylus. So little circles. And this just creates some really pretty artistic effects. This foliage over here is really not something that I want. But for the simplicity of this basic tutorial, I'm just going to leave it as is. But again, if you join my Zoom course, I'll go into detail on how to completely blend this little corner in with the rest of the image. So little circles, little circles, little circles. And this one I use predominantly for my background, to create texture, to create interest, that kind of thing. It's not something I use on skin, it's not something I use for details. I will use this on elements like flowers, because if I come in here and I just soften all of these elements up, it does look better. And remember, because you're working in Photoshop, you can utilize the layers, and you can go back, add a mask, and paint off anywhere that you didn't want it to be, this particular effect. but I like to come in and just soften everything up. Now, it's a lot like photography editing, where you can come back in after and adjust all of those tones using dodging and burning, which again, I'll go over fully in the course if you're interested. So we're just softening this up, and this is pretty much all I ever use this particular brush for. It's a great little artistic blender, but it's not something that really gives you the painterly effect. It's more of a softening thing, so I don't go too far into the tool or other things like that. Okay, so that's how that one works, and I use that all the time. And a lot of times what you can do is duplicate your layer, especially after you've painted your subject, and you can go over the rim and then you can mask it off. All right, let's go into the next one. So my next favorite one is the oil. This is an oil paint brush, and it's Painter Edge, and this one is a game changer. So this is the one that's really going to drastically affect your image, and you can see you might want to have a stylus that has the ability to rotate in circles, so you can see this brush is rotating. So if you have a lower end tablet with a stylus, you're probably not going to have this, but because I'm using the Science tablet, and Science is far cheaper than Wacom, and it's far better. The build is better. I'll put a link below in the description if you're interested in not dealing with any of Wacom's issues. I highly recommend using Science. Okay, so depending on the size, you have to adjust the size of your brush, but this one creates amazing painting like strokes, and I love using this one for fabric, especially like tulle. And all you have to do is really super easy strokes, and you're going to get those really amazing painting looking strokes. So this one I typically do for fabrics, especially edges of fabrics. Just going to zoom out a little bit. Now keep in mind, when we're dealing with brushes that are made with the mixer brush, they're slower than a regular brush. So don't get frustrated, just let it do its thing. So you can, whatever direction you're going in like this, try going back in a separate direction. Now the nice thing with this brush is it has a texture applied to it in the making of it, so it already has that painterly quality to it. And yeah, so you can drastically affect the fabric, and I use this for all the fabric because it just really ends up looking just like a painting. It's absolutely amazing. But the more you use it, the more you'll get used to the little idiosyncrasies that it possesses, and you'll figure it out. But it does take practice. But this one really makes your fabric look like a painting. And honestly, with this brush set, this is what I use for all of my paintings now. It's absolutely perfect. Try going over different places. And the beauty, like I said earlier, with painting is that nothing is expected to be perfect. So if you have weird blends and weird edges and shadows and strokes showing, that's what people would expect in a painting. So if you look at some of the greats, like let's say Pino Donnay, who's my favorite all-time Italian oil painter, he always had, you know, brush strokes everywhere. And the nice thing is when you're viewing it from afar, it all looks perfect. If you look up close, you realize nothing's really perfect because it doesn't have to be. So this one is one of my all-time favorites, so I highly suggest using this one. Okay, the next one I'm going to demo is going to be our Skin Painter. Now, obviously, Skin Painter is super important. You can see a lot of acne here, but what I do is, again, little circles, and because it's a mixer brush, wherever you put your brush down, that's the color that you're merging. So constantly lift up, put down, lift up, put down, lift up, put down, and then you're going to get the best results. I like using this one specifically for blending my edges between skin and edges. I just think it works seamlessly, and all we're trying to do is mix all of these colors together. And one of the wonderful things about working with painting as opposed to retouching is you can affect, look at this, I'm just going to take her dark roots out, and all I'm doing is pushing this color over into her roots, pushing it over. And it's so simple, and it blends so seamlessly. Okay, so little circles, always little circles. And obviously there's a lot more to making a beautiful painting than just using brushes. So if you would like to learn more, you can join my Zoom workshop that's going to be starting in a bit. But until you get proficient with the mixer brush and figure out how these brushes actually respond to what you do, it's going to be a learning curve. So just keep practicing, keep trying, and know that if you have, like I said before, an image that has a ton of grain, you definitely want to run it through a denoiser or something like that so that you don't have to deal with it, because it's going to make your painting process 50% easier. 50%, if not more. Okay, but this is the skin blender, which is awesome. I love it. Okay, so before and after, you can see the tool that we did as well as that. Obviously I could do a lot more, but I want to move on to other brushes so I can show you what else they can do. All right, so my next favorite one is definitely the NH Wispy Edges. Now this one is a mixer brush for the hair. I do have a regular hairbrush, but this one, wait till you see this. This is quick, easy, and oh my God. It'll just transform your hair, especially if, you know, there's noise or whatever. So all you do is you you go in the direction of the hair. And it's going to make your hair perfect. You're going to get rid of all the noise, the strands, all that other stuff, and it's going to look like a painting immediately. Look at that. Again, you guys, you don't have to make your image look perfect because it's supposed to be a painting. So don't hesitate to go over the edges, and you can always go back in and use general retouching techniques to get rid of those darker roots if you want to. But yeah. You can even use this on the eyebrows, on the eyelashes. I mean, her eyelashes are already kind of ridiculous, so I don't know how much more I want to do on those, right? So I'm going to make my brush smaller, and I'm just going to demo what you can do with eyebrows to make them look a little bit more painterly. So just keep in mind, whenever you're using smudge tools or mixer brushes, you want to always go in the direction of the pixels that they already exist in. So you don't want to create new directions unless you're completely redoing a section. Again, I can show you how to do that in my course, but just stay in the general direction so that you don't make a massive mistake. These eyelashes, I would almost minimize them by coming in from the skin and trying to minimize them because they're just too much for me. I mean, everybody loves eyelashes, but gosh, that's ridiculous. Okay, so you can come in this way. All right, so that is the hairbrush. Look at the hairbrush. Isn't that amazing? So the hairbrush is spectacular. Let's go on. I have several other ones. I've got a hair smudge. I've got a painter edge, which I showed you. I've got oil paint pointed, and I've got mixer brushes, bushy mixer brushes. Let's go to the air oil paint pointed. So this one is more detail oriented. So if you wanted to come in and create more kind of oil paint strokes, this is what you would do. I would use this probably a little less heavy-handed, but if you want those individual strokes, then I would recommend this one. Because sometimes you're going to have areas of your painting where you're really going to want some defined oil painting like strokes, and this is when you would use it. For instance, make your brush smaller, let's say on her nails, like so. If you wanted them to be a little bit more ornate, a little more oil painting like, then you just come in. But you just have to work with a smaller brush and realize that it's going to affect various parts of that color when you do it. Okay? You could even do it like on the button here, and this ends up making it look very painterly. Right? It's a good thing to use on shiny jewelry because you don't want those actual perfect little round catch lights, highlights, whatever. You would rather them look a little bit more painterly like. And so doing something like this really actually makes it look more like a painting because we don't want it to look perfectly photographic. And so in doing that, you're always manipulating the pixels so that they look less photorealistic and more painting like. So don't forget the little details like this. And those are just a few of the brushes. Now, what would you do if you wanted to add texture? Let's say you're missing a bunch of texture. Let's use our texture brush. So I typically have it at a flow of 50. This is not a mixer brush, it's a regular paint brush. But what you want to do is you can go on a blank layer, you can change your blend mode to multiply if you would like to do a little bit of like burning, and then you can sample the color, and because it's on a multiply blend mode, you can come in and you can start affecting the shadows with this. Now this, like I said, is a texture brush, so all it's going to do is create texture in the shadows that you perhaps want to add some shadows to. And then don't be afraid of ever just reducing that down. But I find that it actually works really well for texture. Sometimes with oil paintings or any kind of painting in general, you lose a lot of the texture in the image, so this is just going to come and add some back depending on where you want to be. Don't be afraid to reduce the size of your brush. If you want the shadows to be a little bit smaller, if you want more detail, you can always come in and do it this way and just reduce it down. And if you don't want the texture to be so harsh, you can always add a blur, a Gaussian blur to it. But yeah, so other than that, all of these have their own very interesting things that they do. There's always detail brushes, so let's go back to the other layer. So for details, this one is lovely, let's say for lips. And it creates the same kind of painterly look. So my advice to you is to just really experiment and play with these brushes so that you get the best possible results out of them. And the key is, remember, this is not photography. We're not looking for realism. We're looking for artistic feels and all the lovely brush strokes that we get from using these types of brushes. So don't be afraid. Just experiment and play. Nothing happens without a learning curve, right? Like nothing. So everything that you do, just expect a relatively large learning curve. And as long as you're prepared for that and willing to put in the work, you're going to succeed with everything that you want to do artistically. But yeah, you want those erratic kind of brush strokes, because in paintings nothing is ever perfect. If anything, it's less than perfect, which makes it look far more interesting to me than a photograph, right? So you're just pushing pixels and manipulating shadows and highlights and creating new looks with everything that you do, before and after. So if you'd like to join my course, comment below. I'm also posting a link in my Facebook group for everybody that wants to join, and it's going to be over 4 weeks on a weekend. We usually run them about 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, if that works. If it doesn't work, I'm sorry. Kind of choosing a time that works for the majority of people that want to join in. But yeah, I hope that I get to see you then. Until the next video, bye everyone.